All right, what's going on, everybody? So in this video, really quick, what I want to do is just kind of, clarify that, finishing off the discussion of the modes of the major scale, right? When we put the Phrygian one out there, obviously hearing the sounds of it, because there's other videos out on the channel talking about the construction of it and some of the properties of the scale as well. But in this last one, we really got to hear that sound, right? That dark sound that is Phrygian. Phrygian's used a lot in rock, metal. It really gives that deeper sound that quite a few metal artists really like. But with that being said, with that mode, with hearing it, right, and we've talked about the construction of all of them, except for the Locrian, whatever. I think what is important now is to really move into understanding chords. Now, we spoke about our power chords. We spoke about, our triads. We went over the diminished triad. We went over the half diminished because we talked about the sevenths, right? So we had the major and minor sevenths, and then the dominant seventh, right? We talked about how to get those chords, and I think those were genuinely necessary to have that picture when you're putting modes together, to be able to talk about the chords, right? So we spoke about the major, minor triads all over the place, as well as the diminished. But really what I'm looking at when we start talking about chords is moving into some of the extended chords, right? When we start talking about our ninths, our major, minor ninths, whatever it may be, right? There's 13ths, there's 11ths. There's some that there's only so many fingers on, that you've got. So there's some chords that, you can't hit every single note in the chord, and we'll talk about that and what some of the alternatives are when we do start extending chords. When do you skip a third? When do you skip a fifth? How do you put that together, right? So there's a lot that really starts to come into play when we talk about chords on a much larger scale. And the chords, you also have some crazy names with the chords, right? G over B major, whatever it may be, and it really starts to have an effect on understanding what all the combinations of the notes from the scale that you're putting together, because that's obviously how we put our chords together, is we just use the notes of the scale. So when we're putting that stuff together, we really have to understand some of the terminology, just like we talked about with half diminished, right? Why was it half diminished, right? It's still the diminished fifth. It's really diminished triad, and following that with a minor seventh, right? Craziness. But the way that we talk about chords and we start naming our chords, that's just a little bit different. So that's one aspect of it. The other is definitely chord progressions, and how some of the extended chords start to fit into that thought process. But really, when we talk about chords, we're talking about our harmonies, right? But ultimately, we are going to want to solo over our chords, right? We're going to have to take into account different considerations when we're putting that melody over chords. So we're going to talk about passing notes. We're going to talk about transitions. There's a whole area when we start talking about how do we start to really put those melodies that we want over our chords. So we're going to get into all of that, and that really is the next area that we're going to be talking about on the channel. And one of the things that I also wanted to bring up is this week I'm not gonna be putting out a lesson this week, because really what I want to do is put together a full lesson plan for the chords that are coming up. And really, in order to do that, I need to kind of lay out the roadmap, rather than just throwing out a random lesson. Really, putting it together this week is what I'm doing. So again, there's not going to be a lesson this week. Next week, and I'll get out the initial chord, first lesson of the chords. Probably going to be finishing off the triads with the sus chords. Probably heard of them before, sus2, sus4. And that way we have that, we pretty much have that full picture within the octave. But we will be talking about how we use the second and the fourth and the sixth for that matter, because obviously we've spoken a lot about the third and the fifth. So we're gonna expand on that quite a bit. So I think it'll be a good lesson that we're going to ultimately put together for everything. And one of the other areas is we start kind of getting that much larger picture of things. One of the things I want to do is start bringing in pretty much some of the legends, Bach, Vivaldi, Beethoven, right? And with Bach, we pretty much owe music theory to Bach. I mean, that's pretty much about all there is to that one. So, let me know down in the comments what you think about that, right? I think it's important for the historic importance of them. Plus, they got some awesome music. I was looking at a piece this morning from Vivaldi in B flat. Sounded great. And I just started thinking, this is some cool stuff too. Some practical, some practical music from, like I said, from some of the greats of the past. Besides, it's always cool to keep their music alive, right? So anyways, let me know down in the comments what you think about that. But I will be putting the pretty much the structure of the next lessons together, where we'll start talking about chords, and there's going to be a lot to that. And just kind of closing out, I want to acknowledge that there's a lot of other scales out there, right? We spoke about the 7 modes of the major scale, and that's going to get you 90% of the way of where you need to be. But there's other scales out there. I fully acknowledge it, right? The melodic or harmonic minors, just to name a couple. There's like a Hungarian scale, the chromatic scale, and we'll get into all of those. But I just want to kind of take a pause on the scales and the modes. We're always going to be hitting the scales because, again, we construct our chords from the scales, right? And then we'll talk about chord progressions a little bit more in the modes. But for now, we're going to kind of let the modes solidify, the modes of the major scale, and just kind of keep it at that area for the time being. Like I said, I fully acknowledge that there's other scales and modes out there. We'll get to those, but I think getting into the chords is going to be very, very cool. It'll be some good stuff that's going on out there. So again, wanted to put that out. Let me know what you think down in the comments about bringing the history back with folks like Beethoven, Bach, Vivaldi, a few others, Handel. Let me know what you think about that. All right. But until then, next weekend will be the first lesson in the series of chords. All right. Until then, take care, everybody.